All right, this is a building query for December 4, 2020. The agenda for which loosely involves not a final preview probably, but another run through of the change report and stat diffs coming to Qri Desktop. And I think we'll dedicate some time too to let Chris walk us through some of the super interesting work he's done on the NYC capital budget project, and/or we can do a victory lap on the New York Times article that features the turnstile data if we want to, but that's all that I've got. Anything else that we wanted to add?
I think that's a great start. Chris, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to. I'll just jump right in and share my screen, and let me see if I can pick the right thing to share. Boom. Okay. So I'll start with the data set. So this is a data set called NYC Capital Project Detailed Data. And this is basically a result of scraping a bunch of PDFs. And for me, this project goes back many years. And I actually was hired at the Department of City Planning to work on a team called the Capital Planning Team, which is tasked with like doing data analyses and trying to figure out sort of equitable allocation of the capital budget, which the city planning department is supposed to have a role in. So the task before us was to actually like try and map the capital budget, and that's basically what I was trying to do again here. But the way the budget is published is kind of hard to understand. It's a lot of screen dumps from computer systems. But something caught my eye recently when I was checking out these PDFs is that they have a new batch of PDFs called Capital Construction Project Detailed Data, which is up here in the title here. So this is a page of the PDF. And this looks like a pretty mundane, boring layout of text on a page here. But you can see this one, there's a managing agency that's in charge of this project. This is called the Adams Street Library Fit Out, which I guess is, descriptive of a library project. The original budget, this isn't 5,000, this is 5,000 plus 3 more zeros. So it's a $5 million project. And then down here we see basically like how much has been spent to date on this project, starting at this fiscal year, which is 0. So this is a new project. And then we can also see how much they plan to spend. So this is supposed to be basically a cost here in the 2021 column and nothing else in the other columns means this is a 1-year project, should be complete, in this fiscal year. So there's a rich amount of data in here. But even more important is there's a thing called project location, which this particular project doesn't have, but many of them do, which is actually helpful for figuring out where these things are happening. And then community boards served is the other tidbit that is not readily available in any of the other sources. So this one says 201, which is actually a typo. They actually got the borough codes wrong, but the borough code 2 is for the Bronx. This is in Brooklyn, so it's actually supposed to be 301, and that's consistent throughout the PDF. So it's probably just a glitch in whatever software generated these things. But anyway, I wrote a scraper, and I've been scraping the capital budget scraping budget PDFs for years, but this one was like really cut and dry and much more straightforward to pull data out of. So just in the README on this data set on Qri Cloud, I've got like one JSON object that represents everything that was pulled off that page. So you can see the community board served, you can see the total spending for the city or versus non-city. That's interesting. That should not be. I think that's a mistake because it says 5,000 here and 5,000 here, and they should add up to 5,000. Oh, okay. Now I need to go check all my work because I think we messed that up. All right. So what can we do with this data set? So I wrote a blog post, and I'll just scroll through this is actually what the original PDFs look like, not the new fancy ones that I found. So they even are a little harder to read and are definitely like little screen dumps from a computer system. But I'll scroll down to the goodies. And what have we here? Okay, so local versus borough-wide capital spending by borough. So this is basically what we're calling local is anything that has community boards assigned to it. So the rest of these are not, in theory, like basically the dark blue color here means what's not mappable according to the data set versus what is mappable. And then we wanted to map it. So this is what I came up with. This is a very long sort of small multiples visualization, but each each category here basically has a total amount of spending, and we can actually see like how the spending is distributed around the city based on the community board served column that was in the data that we scraped. So this is interesting, and you can scroll down and find interesting categories here that you didn't know existed, and try and figure out what's going on here. So it probably raises more questions than it answers, but I think the whole point here is that we're trying to have more eyeballs and more visibility over capital spending in New York City. So you can check that out on your own. And then the next part was this one, which is basically doing analysis of projects that goes a little deeper for a specific community district. So community districts in New York are basically, they chop up the city into these smaller jurisdictions where there's a community board that manages them, and there's a lot of sort of government services that are tracked at this level that are supposed to be a little more local than the borough. So here we have 40-some odd projects where we actually had to manually geocode these, but basically reading the descriptions, we can figure out that this is a library and this is a sewer main project, and this is a, try and find clues to where these things might be. And we're able to kind of get all these on the map. There weren't really any that were not mappable with a point. There are some that are a little more vague, like sewer main projects that cover huge amounts of area. So maybe a point is not the best way to represent them. But this is pretty fascinating because you can actually just kind of explore and get information about each one of these little projects that's happening all over the place. And some of them add up to quite a bit of money. So it's just an interesting view and something I've been chasing for a while to be able to do this kind of mapping of the capital budget. And it's pretty fascinating. So I think for next steps, we want to extend this to more parts of the city and maybe get a crowdsourcing effort together to try and start geocoding what needs to be about 4,000 of these. I did 40 of them in an hour or so. But if we can get a lot of people together that have more local subject matter expertise, we might be able to get a reasonably complete map of everything that is mappable in this data set. So that's all I have to share. But yeah, this was a really fun project to work on. You should check out the blog if you want to see more about how it happened.
So cool.
That's fantastic. So that's like, you didn't just scrape, you scraped and added.
Scraped and added, and actually the geometries that I added to these need to be published in a separate data set, which I will do sometime today or tomorrow. But yeah, that needs to be put back out into the world so that other people can add to it. But yeah.
I had a question. The mistake that you spotted where the community codes were swapped between the two boroughs, did you fix that already, or were you going to?
Yes, that was fixed in the scraping code, and it only happened. There's 6 PDFs, so there's 5 boroughs plus there's another PDF for citywide, and three of them were kind of swapped around and we're pointing to the wrong data. So yeah, there's a line in the scraper code where I correct those.
Amazing, cool.
So, but I'm more worried about the error that I just saw in the README, and I don't know if I actually fixed that or not. So now I want to make sure that every number that I put into this blog post isn't doubled. Right. That would be a problem. So that's what I'm going to do after this call.
Fingers crossed.
Joys of demoing live. And I mean, I think that's the nice thing about versioning stuff is when we cut new versions, go, hey, we had an error in our code, and you can disclose that. I think it's delightful. Very cool.
I'm more worried about the manual effort that went into a lot of these graphics that is not reproducible. Is not reproducible with code.
Right.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
It's a lot of changing 8.6 to 3.5 or 4.3. That's how you do it by 2.
Yep.
See, it's easy to make mistakes on there.
Well, on this particular map, the text is all vectors, so I can't even just edit that. So it's a bummer of it coming out of QGIS. I think there's a way to do it properly where it comes out as text, but I couldn't figure it out quickly yesterday. So
that's it tomorrow, bro.
Anyway, good times. I hope I'm not off by a factor of 100%.
Totally. Cool. So with that, the other bit we're going to chat about today is changes and change reports and understanding how changes work. So this is a feature we've been working on for a while, but like really we've been focusing on for the last 3 weeks. Yeah, is that right? 3 weeks? Month?
Feels like at least that.
Yeah. And so I'm going to quickly share screen and show where we're at this point. Let's share screen 1. Hey, look at that. So this is Qri Desktop. This is not, this is a development version of Qri Desktop that has, and right now we're looking at a crypto OSS dataset. This is my dataset from a while ago, working on classification of different cryptocurrencies according to some of their sort of characteristics that are available from their actual source code. And so this is a dataset talking about things like the price in US dollars at a certain point for the currency, what language it's written in, a bunch of like goodies, the license that it uses, there's the language itself. We have some like nice statistics on the breakdown of certain languages. And then like, when was the project created? And so the thing that is new and exciting for this is we now, as we're making commits, we have this constant challenge of like, what's changing between from one version to the next. And so I had this force update that was 1 minutes ago, and body changed by 4%. That was 14 minutes ago. And so we have a bunch of stuff in the app right now that sort of like starts at this. As you can see, when I move between these two commits, I get a yellow indicator on the body that shows me that, hey, actually the body was the thing that was modified between the two commits. And then we sort of have some information that we can glean from the general overview. We can see that there are 689 rows in this one and 710 rows in this prior version. But now we have the makings of a better sort of place to sort of get that summary. Where in the past you'd have to sort of grab it all from different pieces of the UI to try and understand what changed from version to version. This change report that we've started to build is a mechanism for just, hey, show me what changed from version to version. And so in this case, what happens is Qri is going to go through and generate a high-level description of changes. This is not the same thing as a diff. We've been talking a little bit in the past. A diff is like a specific script for explaining what changed from one version to another. With data, that can get really useless really fast. In this example, we've dropped just 50 rows of data from one to another. So that would represent like, you know, how many columns does this thing have? This has 28 columns, 50 times 28, a number of cells changed just in dropping those rows. And then we have a bunch of manipulations and moves. And so for this, we're starting to build up these change reports, which instead of looking at the individual cells changed, show you a statistical breakdown of the change between two versions. And so this isn't finished yet. What we're demoing right now is sort of the first pass. The thing that we are showing you now is this is actually on live data. And so this is being calculated on the fly instead of being a sort of mock-up of what might show up. We can actually see that, hey, the path of this changed, the length of this changed, the number of entries changed in a highlighted sort of diff format. We can see that the meta did not change, which is useful. But then we can also see this new thing, which is the stats, and we can actually sort of compare between the two. The one thing that we don't have up and running for quite yet that we're gonna have to sort of use our imaginations for is the actual sort of highlighting of the difference between the two, which we have planned in UI, but don't actually have the data responding for yet. But you can see here that there are 710 entries here and 689 entries in here. And so we've calculated and surfaced that information. And the last thing we have to do is actually add in the last bit of UI that just highlights this and sort of says, hey, this changed. And so you can imagine all of this will sort of be a little prettier and show you exactly what has changed from one version to the next in this stats overview. But what this has done is sort of properly captured changes from one version to the next of different stats and different columns. I have a question in chat, so I'm going to open the chat. Yes, it would also be nice to see how much it changed, which is, as I understand, properly coming down the pipeline. And so there are some columns that I do not know changed a bunch. And so here's a good example. This is like a common sort of view. We had -481 a whole bunch and -495 on this histogram, sort of showing up a whole bunch. So I can kind of see, just based on the whole idea here, is you should be able to sort of glance at the two distributions and see, oh, okay, these columns are roughly the same. They didn't really change much from version to version. But this one, obviously, we do have some changes. I can very quickly visually tell that we had a big shift from this version to this version. We have -616, but like we can see this, we had -25 and -42 as like, so the actual buckets have shifted and the distribution has shifted of this. And so the distribution of these two things is actually quite different. We can see the median has moved a bunch from, what did we move from? We moved from 12 to 7. 12.2 to 7.3, and the mean from 130 to 126. So like, we know there's a shift here, and we know that not only has the number of columns, now the number of rows dropped, our max has stayed the same. So whatever the max value is identical, and the min has stayed the same. So whatever the minimum value is identical. But we've had some shift in the actual average value from between the two versions, which is a really useful jumping off point for understanding what's changed between two things. And the most important thing to note here is that this calculation is much faster to run than an actual diff. And so this change report that we can generate is really quite useful across even very large data sets that are measured in sort of gigabytes. It's reasonable to calculate these sort of change report differences very quickly without digging down into the individual diffing of specific data set versions, which can get quite computationally expensive. Yeah, so that's where we're at. We've still got lots more to come, but the big progress that we have to report is we are actually now calculating and showing these. We're showing them on save as well. So if I save a new version of this data set, I actually have not prepared a demo of that, but if I save a new version of this data set, it will calculate a change and show it to me on the fly as the sort of final step of the save process. We have a lot of work to do in this department, but a lot of the groundwork was done over the last 3 weeks. Now we can actually sort of click this button, have it recalculate changes on the fly, and show us some answers, which is great. And then just some more UI to come, some cleanup to do, and this should be landing in the released version of Qri Desktop, we expect sort of in roughly 2 weeks. So with that, I will stop bothering and ask if others have any questions.
Casey had flagged for us internally that there might be, I don't know if this is a breaking change, but for data sets created before this capability existed, so for any existing users, perchance they're watching this call, anything that they should know or be prepared for?
Nope, we've covered all that. Basically, we're going to retroactively calculate statistics for you if you are using an older version of a data set. Basically, we've to pull off this trick, we've elevated the notion of stats calculation, and we now save them and calculate and save them whenever you save a new version of a data set. We realize that we have to do that sort of calculation. We have to do that pass over the entire data set anyways while we're saving. And so it's the right time to sort of just run that expensive calculation and do it for you. But we can also just run that on any old data set. And so that's exactly what Qri will do under the hood. And so if you have a version that doesn't have a stats component, we'll just calculate one for you on the fly. Cool. Any other questions? We've got a long way to go here, but it's a much shorter way than it was before. I can't wait you can see how trivial it'll be to build the UI that sort of takes us from 710 and shows us a little sort of minus icon that displays the difference. But the hard work
will help a lot to just understand. Like, it's really hard. You still compare numbers here.
Yeah, you still have to look at number to number, and so that UI is really going to make the sort of like jump obvious. And so like right now, having to do 58 to 48, being able to see those both very quickly will be a really nice
also,
shift.
A toggle for log scale versus like linear scale would be really nice for, especially for those frequency pins.
Yeah, like we had, actually, let's track that. We had no license from 258 to 248. For one version of the next bit, MIT dropped 5. It's a much better example. I should have used that as the example. Because now I can see very quickly that the MIT value, there were 5 projects that left removed from one version to another that had the MIT license, which is a much more useful thing than if I had to manually look through the whole column and count the MITs.
Also, quick note for anybody actually using this. It's all based on probabilistic structures. So it's not like 1,000% accurate, even the oxymoron. But it is a really useful way to like glean changes from a data set. It's just that it's not really data that you should use further in machine processing. It's really meant for human processing, like understanding of the data.
Absolutely, that's really worth pointing out. Like, this is not the same thing as like hash comparison or anything or hash creation where if a single value changed, that it'll show up. It's possible to have the value shift ever so slightly, and that will not show up in the diff, right? Where you could say, hey, in this change report, right? If I changed a 1 to a 2 in a column that is nothing but 1s and 2s, having that single value flip isn't going to be a statistically significant difference, and so it won't show up here. But
it should be fairly sensitive to changes based on how it's tuned right now for even very big data sets. But that small loss of accuracy allows us to work on very large data sets with this.
Yeah, and so it sounds scary when we say, hey, it might miss changes, but I think the key caveat is it will only miss statistically insignificant changes, and so it's not. If you're doing aggregate analysis and you're working on a data set that has, for example, 100,000 rows in it, a 1 to a 2 is not really. It might be crucial, but it's not the sort of starting point for your universe. And so
on the flip side, it will be a lot more robust once we do the diffing piece, because then we will have even hard comparisons. We'll know the column changed even though the change is not statistically significant.
Yeah. So all of those things are coming. Yeah, I think that covers everything we needed to cover. Does anybody have any open business or questions remaining on that?
Robert, maybe? I'm putting you on the spot.
He dropped off.
Yeah, the review hides it. Bad.
Yeah, it's all good. Cool. So yeah, I think that's all the news that's fit to print for this sprint. Looking forward to a proper release of some of this stuff and a major cleanup. And so we should be demoing this probably next Monday and Friday again with the new fun stuff that includes the actual green highlighted text, which will make it much easier to see. Neat. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining this week's Sprints edition of Building Query.